Ned Stark rode with a leaden heart through the barren foothills surrounding the Tower of Joy, the memories of battle still vivid in his mind. Dawn's early light fell over the broken stones of the old ruin where, years ago, he had dueled men he once admired. In his recollections, their steel had clashed beneath a sky streaked with the red of dawn. So many had been lost that day. The wind blew over the dusty rocks and through the sparse brush as if lamenting the unspoken truths left buried in that land. Ned's breath was slow, weighted by lingering guilt, for he carried with him a secret that was never his to share. Yet now, fate compelled him to revisit that place, drawn by a faint whisper of rumor that would not let him rest. He remembered Ser Arthur Dayne as the finest knight he had ever known, a man whose skill and honor were spoken of by every corner of Westeros. They had been on opposite sides, but Ned had always held a certain reverence for the man called the Sword of the Mourning. Arthur had died there, or so it was believed, after that fierce confrontation for which there had been so few witnesses. Many times, Ned had woken in the night with the final images from that morning burned into the back of his eyelids. Ser Arthur with his pale blade dawn shining like a shard of sunlight given mortal form, clashing relentlessly against men who fought to protect their lord and future king's sister. But the rumor could not be dismissed so easily, and Ned was not one to ignore a matter as grave as the possibility that Ser Arthur Dayne still lived. It had come to Ned from an unlikely source, a wandering septon who had passed through Winterfell some moons ago. This septon claimed to have nursed a grievously injured man many years past, a man of extraordinary bearing who had wielded a broken sword of milky white steel. The septon never knew the knight's true name, yet he recalled the haunting words the man would murmur in his feverish dreams. A vow to protect something or someone. The septon, unversed in noble houses and the meaning of heraldry, could only recount that the battered sword had looked like pale dawnlight. That was enough to prick Ned's conscience, stirring a dreadful sense of possibility. He had left Winterfell under the pretense of attending to quiet matters in the south. He had told Catelyn little, only that it concerned old allegiances and debts of war. She had pressed him, but he was resolute, and she had respected his privacy. Even so, guilt threatened to overwhelm him, for the greatest debt of that war still lay asleep in the castle nursery, unknowing of his parentage. Jon was the reason for Ned's uneasy conscience. The boy was growing older, and the more Ned saw Rhaegar's quiet intensity in him, or perhaps Lyanna's fierce spirit, the heavier the secret grew. In his approach to the Tower of Joy, Ned tried to recall the final moments of that fateful duel. He could see it in his mind's eye, the swirl of dust around his boots, the sweat trickling down his brow, the sharp sting in his left shoulder as he parried a blow from Arthur's shining blade. He remembered how it all ended with Howland Reed's intervention, the small crannogman saving him in a moment of mortal peril. Ser Arthur had fallen. Dawn had dropped to the ground, gleaming as if the sunrise had spilled from the heavens. Afterward, Ned had gone inside the tower and found Lyanna, barely clinging to life, her last words shaping the promise that would define his existence for the years to come. In the days and weeks following that confrontation, it was widely believed that Ser Arthur Dayne was dead, as indeed he should have been, and Ned never had cause to doubt it. But the past had a way of returning in the strangest forms. If Ser Arthur truly survived, it would change everything. Ned did not know how that was possible, unless Arthur had not been as gravely wounded as believed, or unless someone had aided him, hidden him away, and quietly spirited him to safety while Ned was lost in his grief for Lyanna. As he reached the base of the tower, which stood in crumbling ruin, Ned dismounted. He felt the morning chill and let the reins fall slack in his hands. Memories flooded him, and for a moment he closed his eyes, half expecting to hear the ring of steel echo off the old stones. There was only the faint rustle of a breeze over a barren expanse. The horses stirred uneasily, as if sharing in their master's apprehension. Ned stroked his mount's neck, seeking to calm the beast and perhaps calm himself too. He proceeded inside what remained of the structure. Broken walls rose around him like the fragmented bones of a long-dead beast. The floor was strewn with rubble and the battered remnants of old furniture. Dust coated everything, and beams of sunlight stabbed through gaping holes in the walls. Ned felt his pulse quicken. Each step sounded too loud in the hush. So many times in the quiet of Winterfell's gods, would he had wondered what might have happened if the day had gone differently. Would Rhaegar's children still be alive? Would Lyanna still breathe? Would the Targaryen line have persisted in peace or continued in war? But those questions were only ghosts. The living matter more, he reminded himself. He heard a shuffle of movement behind him and whirled, hand on the hilt of his sword. Dust swirled in the eddies of air as a figure stepped from the shadows, cloaked and lean, face hidden beneath a dark hood. Ned's heart thumped a warning. He called out, his voice echoing across cracked stone. The figure did not speak. Slowly, Ned reached for the sword at his belt. His gray eyes narrowed, and something in him told him to stand firm, not to attack hastily. A hand emerged from the cloak, empty and raised in a gesture of caution, as though to calm him. The figure pulled back the hood, revealing hair of silver gold, though it was no longer as lustrous as the day Ned last glimpsed it. A familiar face came into view, etched with time and hardship, but undeniably that of Ser Arthur Dayne. The knight's gaze was as steady as Ned recalled, and his shoulders still carried the proud bearing of one once called the finest knight in the realm. But he was thinner, and there was a tightness around his mouth that spoke of pain and secrets born in silence. Ned froze, breath stopping in his throat. He remembered that face from the final day of the rebellion, the face he thought he had seen in the dust, eyes dimming with the approach of death. But here he stood. Ned felt a rush of anger and relief all at once, so powerful it made him tremble. He had never expected to see this man again, yet across the years, the image of Ser Arthur Dayne had loomed large in his life. Ned's voice emerged strained when he finally spoke. "You live. How?" Arthur's expression was somber. "You see a ghost, Lord Stark. Perhaps I am nothing more than that." The swirl of confusion took a long moment to settle. Ned loosened his sword hand but did not release the hilt entirely. His mind raced with questions. Had this been a carefully orchestrated deception by the Kingsguard all along? Some cunning game by Targaryen loyalists? But a deeper recognition gnawed at him. Arthur Dayne had been honorable, not a man of trickery. He would have sworn his life to the rightful king. Was that all it was, loyalty that had not yet died? Or was there something more? "Why?" Ned asked. "After everything, why linger here? What purpose brings you to this ruined place?" Ser Arthur lowered his gaze, a flicker of regret crossing his features. "Why do you think?" he replied softly. "Why would I remain near the place where your sister drew her last breath?" That, Ned's heart lurched. He felt the name on his tongue. Lyanna. Memories of her bright laughter and fierce spirit. Memories of her final moments in that tower, delirious and begging him to protect her child. Ned allowed his hand to slip from the sword hilt. He took a measured step forward, eyes searching Arthur's face. "I do not understand. Were you not dying? I saw you fall. Dawn was at your side, your blood on the stones." Arthur's lips curved into a sad, rueful smile. "Dying, yes, but not yet dead. A friend, someone dear, saw to my wounds. We needed the world to believe I had perished. Too much depended on secrecy. I could not do my duty in the light of day." Ned felt a chill creep through him. "Your duty? To protect the last heir of the Targaryens?" The words came out hoarse, almost a whisper, for he knew that the only Targaryens left after the rebellion were Viserys and the infant Daenerys, who had fled across the narrow sea. Or so it was said. But Ser Arthur spoke as though he still had a duty connected to Lyanna's child. Arthur regarded Ned with a gaze so earnest it shook him. "Yes," he said, "but perhaps not in the way you imagine." The weight of that confirmation nearly buckled Ned's knees. He had never told a soul, but it was clear that Arthur Dayne knew. The child was not some random orphan. The child was the secret Ned had vowed to guard. Lyanna's last wish. The child was Jon. And if Arthur Dayne was here for this reason, that changed all the silent calculations Ned had balanced for years. Suddenly, Ned's chest tightened at the thought of anyone, even a famed knight like Arthur, knowing the truth that could undo everything. "How long have you known?" Ned asked, voice taut. "From the moment he was born," Arthur said. "I was sworn to protect Prince Rhaegar's son. It was my final pledge to the Crown Prince, and I intended to see it through no matter the cost. But then the war ended, and your victory was complete. Our side lay in ruins. My sister Ashera was lost. The king was dead. Our prince was dead. Everything seemed shattered beyond repair. But there was still the boy." Ned stared at the man, seeing the flicker of anguish in his eyes. He could well guess how Arthur had suffered, losing his king, his prince, his friends, and his sister in the aftermath of the rebellion. For years, Ned had been haunted by the knowledge that Lady Ashera Dayne had thrown herself from the cliffs of Starfall, apparently in grief. And so Ned understood that Arthur might cling all the more fervently to the last remnant of his old loyalties. The child. "You knew?" Ned repeated, tension thrumming in his voice. "But you let me take him. Let the world believe your prince was only my bastard." A faint hint of bitterness hovered in Arthur's voice. "It was your sister's wish," he said. "And you were the only man honorable enough to protect him in a realm that would have seen him destroyed the moment his parentage was known. The Targaryen name was poison, thanks to the Mad King's atrocities. If Robert Baratheon had ever learned the truth..." He trailed off, letting the unspoken horror of that realization hang in the dusty air. Better for Jon to grow up a Stark bastard than to be cut down as a Targaryen heir. Ned's throat went dry at the mention of Robert's name. His oldest friend had grown to despise every hint of Targaryen blood, so much that he had hunted down what few children might have survived. Ned had always known how precarious the secret was, how precarious it remained. The knowledge threatened not just Jon's life but the stability of the entire realm. It was a long while before Ned could speak again. "Why reveal yourself to me now?" Sir Arthur exhaled, long and weary. "Fate has a way of pushing men to do what they must. I did not seek you out. I remained hidden in these lands, believing it was safest for all. But in time I heard rumors of the boy's growth. My old vow weighed heavily on me, and then I learned you had come south. I could not simply vanish. I needed to be sure that all was well with him. Too many years have passed in secrecy." Ned struggled with a maelstrom of emotions. This was the man he had believed he killed. This was the man who was once sworn to protect the Targaryens. And now, in the broken shell of the Tower of Joy, they were face to face, bound by a secret that would tear the Seven Kingdoms apart if it were spoken aloud. "Jon is safe," Ned said simply, though an undercurrent of doubt tainted his confidence. "He is at Winterfell, and he is my son in all but name." Arthur's expression softened. "That is good, and I trust you have raised him well, taught him the values your house holds dear. But the time may come, Lord Stark, when truths can no longer be hidden. Already, rumors stir. Enemies gather, men who would do anything to gain power. Westeros grows restless under King Robert's rule. And beyond the sea, House Targaryen lives in exile, biding its time. The child could be both the realm's greatest hope and its greatest threat." Ned felt the echo of those words resonate within him. He was a man who had clung to the letter of his promise. But the thought that Arthur Dayne had been lingering like a ghost all these years, quietly safeguarding the secret from afar, turned Ned's world upside down. He looked at the man in front of him, thinking of how best to proceed. Should he try to bring Arthur back to Winterfell? Could he trust him entirely? Could he confide in him about how the boy had grown? His likes, his faults, the warmth in his smiles, the determination in his eyes? "How can I be sure," Ned asked carefully, "that your presence will not draw the wrong attention? If Robert learns of your survival, it would raise dangerous questions." Arthur inclined his head slightly. "I have lived in the shadows long enough to know how to remain hidden, and I do not wish to endanger Jon. My oath remains the same, to protect him at all costs." His gaze lifted, meeting Ned's eyes squarely. "But I cannot do that alone. Not anymore." Ned recognized the plea beneath Arthur's cool composure. The years of isolation had worn on him. The once proud knight was a man out of place in a kingdom that believed him dead. Yet he had endured it all for the sake of the child. In that, Ned saw a reflection of his own struggles, his own burdens. They were united in a strange brotherhood of secrecy, and neither had found peace from it. Slowly, Ned extended his hand. Arthur looked at it, and Ned saw the moment's hesitation, the shadow of old loyalties that set them against each other. But then Arthur clasped Ned's forearm in a knightly greeting. The gesture felt like a new beginning. "Then come with me," Ned said quietly. "Not to Winterfell, at least not yet. Somewhere else, somewhere we can speak freely. We must decide what to do next. We must decide how best to protect Jon." Arthur nodded. "Lead the way, Lord Stark." They left the tower behind them, mounting their horses in silence. Neither man spoke as they rode westward, away from the ruin that had shaped both of their lives. The dust of dawn soon gave way to the clear light of morning, and Ned felt as though the day were more than a passage of time. It was the beginning of a new fate, one that might test his vow in ways he had never anticipated. They traveled under the looming presence of the Red Mountains in Dorne. Ned had chosen a remote path, far from the main roads and prying eyes. The passing days were filled with subdued conversation, cautious words shared beneath the wide desert sky. Ned learned of how Arthur had drifted from place to place after recovering from his wounds, always careful not to draw attention. He had lived among fisherfolk on the coast, tended horses at remote stables, labored on a farm for meager coin, anywhere to remain unseen. But some intangible bond kept him tethered near the spot where everything changed, the Tower of Joy. Arthur told Ned how he had quietly watched for news of the boy's well-being over the years. Once he thought of traveling north to see Jon from afar, but fear of discovery stopped him. Ned, in turn, shared how Jon had grown, describing the boy's quiet determination, his hunger for acceptance, and the warmth of his heart. He spoke sparingly of Sansa, Arya, Robb, Bran, and Rickon, for fear that the name Targaryen might inadvertently slip into conversation, endangering them. Still, he wanted Arthur to know that Jon was not alone, that he had siblings who cared for him. Yet it weighed on Ned that Arthur now knew more than even Catelyn, and that was a precarious line to walk. Night after night, they made camp in hidden hollows or among rocky outcroppings, each taking turns to stand watch. Arthur kept a watchful eye on the horizon, as if expecting pursuers at any moment. Ned marveled at the man's diligence. Even as an exile believed dead, Arthur Dayne never forgot the vigilance required of a Kingsguard knight. He was still the sword of the mourning in spirit, if not in title. When they reached a small abandoned holdfast deep in the Red Mountains, its crumbling walls offered enough shelter and secrecy to allow for more thorough discussions. By day, they cleared out rubble, securing what they could for a more comfortable stay. By evening, they took their seats near the remnants of an old hearth. The sun's last rays pierced the narrow windows, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the warm glow. Ned gazed into the low-burning embers, the weight of his obligations pressing against his chest. "We cannot simply bring you north. Even if you traveled in disguise, there are too many eyes at Winterfell of late. King Robert visits from time to time. My lady wife," he paused, jaw tight. "She would have questions I could not answer, not without unraveling everything." Arthur, kneeling by the hearth, added another piece of wood to the flames. "Then we must find a place for me somewhere in the north, outside your castle, or perhaps somewhere along the neck. I know your friend Howland Reed was one of the few who survived that day with us." Ned nodded slowly. "Howland is loyal, and he knows the truth of that battle at the tower. He never asked about the child's parentage, but I suspect he guessed more than I ever admitted. Maybe in the swamps of the neck you could pass unseen, but I would not want to impose upon him unannounced. Besides, the neck might be too close. If secrets are to be kept, perhaps it's best you remain in a place where few men venture. The north has its share of such places." He leaned back against the rough stone wall, exhaustion creeping into his bones. Journeying with Arthur for these few days had been a surreal experience. He felt as if he'd stepped outside of the orderly life he had built in Winterfell into a realm of old wars and hidden ghosts. Arthur studied him, brow furrowed, All these years, I've had to reconcile myself with the idea that I failed my oath. I was never able to watch over the child as I'd sworn. Instead, I left him to you, a man who had every reason to despise our prince. Yet I came to see that you are an honorable lord, as I always believed. You protected Jon from those who would do him harm. You gave him a home. Ned's features remained grave. A home he cannot truly claim, not as he deserves. He is a Stark in all but name, but that name of Snow, that mark of bastardy, it weighs on him. And I can do little to ease that burden without endangering his life. Arthur was quiet for a time, letting the fire's crackle fill the silence. Perhaps it is for the best that he grows up believing himself the son of Eddard Stark. He will learn the values of the North, the lessons of honor and duty. But there may come a time when we can no longer hide who he truly is. Ned's heart clenched. He thought of Robert's potential fury, of the realm's reaction if a Targaryen heir stood in their midst. He thought of the Lannisters, cunning and vicious in their pursuit of power. He thought of Varys, the master of whispers, whose little birds sang songs of secrets. And beyond the sea, Viserys and Daenerys Targaryen, exiled siblings who might yet lay claim to the throne. The line between caution and necessity was perilously thin. I have done all in my power to keep Jon safe, Ned said. I will continue to do so, with or without your help. I know, Arthur replied, but let me share some of that burden. They continued in subdued conversation late into the night, planning contingencies. Ser Arthur would travel north but remain in the shadows. Ned would arrange a quiet place for him on the outskirts of the Stark lands, perhaps among some lesser-known bannermen. They agreed that direct contact with Jon would be too dangerous, at least for now. But Arthur's presence would be a silent shield, one more layer of protection for the boy. The days that followed saw them departing the Red Mountains, winding along lesser-traveled trails that skirted the main roads. Ned carried a forged letter, one he had prepared in the event they were questioned, stating that the man who traveled with him was a hedge knight named Ser Gerald Hill, a distant relation from the Westerlands. A plausible enough lie, as men of the West sometimes had golden hair and lean frames. They also took care to avoid the prying eyes of travelers or local lords. Ned had the respect of many in the North, but outside of his domain, curious or ambitious men might sense an advantage in prying into the Lord of Winterfell's private affairs. Along the journey, Ned caught glimpses of the man Arthur Dayne used to be. At night, Arthur would train, going through sword forms, his expression calm and focused. Dawn was gone. Ned did not know what had become of that legendary blade, but Arthur still wielded steel with lethal grace. Sometimes Ned would join him, testing his own skill. Their sparring sessions were brief but intense, each man pushing the other to the edge. They rarely spoke of it, but they both knew these sessions were not merely to keep themselves sharp. They reminded each other of the fateful day that bound their destinies together. They progressed steadily, though the journey was long and wearying. The further north they traveled, the cooler the nights became, and Arthur found himself borrowing furs and cloaks to keep out the chill. Ned noticed the subtle flash of wonder in Arthur's eyes whenever they encountered a bustling northern village or saw the towering pine forests stretching endlessly. The north had never been Arthur's domain. He was a son of Starfall, used to the mild southern winters. There was something in him that seemed at once awed and saddened by these foreign vistas. Eventually, they reached a remote holdfast that belonged to one of the minor bannermen sworn to House Stark. The lord there was an older man named Jory Flint, a taciturn individual who rarely left his own lands. Ned had chosen this place because of Lord Flint's unwavering loyalty and preference for solitude. The holdfast was perched on a rocky rise surrounded by dense forests. A small garrison manned its walls. The people here were hardened and insular. Outsiders were greeted with suspicion, but Ned Stark was known and honored. Ned introduced Arthur under the guise they had agreed upon. Jory Flint, though curious, asked few questions. The man's wife and children had died years ago, and he lived quietly with a small retinue of guards and servants. In the great hall, a modest chamber of stone lit by sputtering torches, Ned spoke privately with Lord Flint, carefully navigating half-truths. He explained that Ser Gerald was a friend who needed a place to stay for a time, discreetly, out of the eyes of King's Landing. He hinted at involvement in Old War business that left enemies behind, but he gave no details. Flint owed House Stark a debt of gratitude from the rebellion days, when Ned had come to his aid against Ironborn raiders. That debt was enough for the old man to ask no further questions. Thus, Arthur Dayne, under a false name, took up residence in the keep's modest guest quarters. Ned spent several days there as well, observing how Arthur acclimated to this new life. He saw how Arthur helped the local men-at-arms train, gently correcting their sword grips and footwork. He noticed how the man walked the battlements at dusk, gaze sliding over the horizon with a watchful tension that never left him. They spoke quietly in corners, always mindful to keep up the ruse in front of others. Once Ned was satisfied that Arthur was settled, he prepared to depart. They stood in the courtyard near Ned's horse, the sky overhead gray with the threat of snow. Jory Flint's men watched from a distance, uninterested in eavesdropping but curious about their lord's visitor. Ned clasped Arthur's forearm, stepping close enough that their voices would not carry. "I will return to Winterfell," Ned said quietly. "For now, remain here. Keep your head down. I will do what I can to see Jon remains safe. If need arises, I will send word through a trusted messenger. Or I may come myself." Arthur gave a curt nod. "And if the time comes when we must reveal the truth?" Ned looked grim. "Pray it does not come to that. The realm is not ready. Robert is not ready. Nor is Jon. But if such a day arrives, we shall face it together." Arthur's gaze flickered across Ned's features. "I am grateful, Lord Stark, for the boy and for this. It is no small mercy you show me, especially after all that transpired." Ned shook his head. "We have both paid our debts in blood. If we can spare more bloodshed in the name of protecting the innocent, that is all I wish." With that, Ned mounted his horse and rode out, traveling with only a pair of loyal men he had brought with him from the north. He left the old keep behind, conscious that he was leaving a living ghost of the rebellion inside those walls. If anyone discovered Arthur's true identity, the consequences would be dire. Still, Ned felt a faint sense of relief, for he no longer carried the burden alone. Another man knew the truth of Jon's heritage and was sworn to protect it. The journey back to Winterfell was long, and Ned took a winding route, avoiding major roads and carefully veiling his presence. Thoughts of Jon filled his mind, how the boy would greet him upon his return, eager for approval. Ned remembered Jon's earnest brown eyes. Sometimes Ned imagined he saw a hint of purple in those eyes, a relic of Targaryen lineage, but perhaps that was only a trick of the firelight. He remembered the boy's questions about his mother, about why Lady Catelyn treated him differently. Ned had learned to deflect those questions with quiet sorrow. But one day, deflections would not suffice. When he finally rode into the courtyard of Winterfell, the sky was the somber gray of late afternoon, and a light dusting of snow coated the ramparts. The familiar sights and smells wrapped around him, bringing a sense of weary comfort. Stable hands rushed to take the horses, and Maester Luwin came forward inquiring about the journey. Ned gave little away, claiming business with an old friend kept him longer than expected. He made his way inside, and there, just outside the great hall, he found Jon. The boy had been waiting, as he so often did, hoping for a moment of his lord father's time. The sight of Jon's thin face, framed by dark curls, struck Ned anew. Here was the living embodiment of Lyanna's last plea. Here was the reason for all his secrets and guilt. Ned dismounted fully, approached, and placed a hand on Jon's shoulder. The boy smiled shyly, a hint of relief in his eyes. "You're home," Jon said softly. "I'm glad. Was your journey successful?" Ned forced a small smile, though his heart felt heavy with the knowledge of what he had done, and the man he had brought north. "It was my boy," he replied, voice gentle. "Thank you for asking. Come, walk with me. Tell me what you've been learning while I was away." Jon's face lit up with boyish eagerness, and he fell into step beside his father. They walked through the courtyard and along the covered walkway, passing guards who bowed respectfully to Ned. Jon spoke of his sword training, of Robb's friendly competition, of Bran's insistence on trying to scale the walls, and of Arya's fascination with archery, much to Septa Mordaine's dismay. He mentioned Sansa's excitement over a new gown, which made Jon feel awkward and out of place. Ned listened, nodding, giving the occasional word of praise or advice. All the while, Ned's mind churned. He pictured Arthur Dayne at that lonely keep, practicing his forms at dusk, every bit the loyal guardian he'd always been. Did Jon feel any stirrings in his blood? Any sense that he was something more than a northern boy of ambiguous birth? Ned often wondered. They reached Ned's solar, and he ushered Jon inside. The warmth of the fireplace embraced them. Ned took a seat and signaled for Jon to do the same. For a long moment, he simply studied the boy. Jon sat with a straight back, trying to appear poised, though his eyes flickered nervously. Ned recalled how Arthur had said that Jon's parentage made him both a threat and a hope for Westeros. Sitting here, facing this boy of perhaps 12 years, Ned saw neither the threat nor the hope, only a child who yearned for belonging. When I was away, Ned began, carefully choosing his words, I was tending to matters that arose from the days of the rebellion, from the time when I fought beside King Robert. Jon's curiosity piqued. He rarely heard Ned speak of those days. You mean the war? Aye, the war that put Robert on the throne. It's been many years now, but ghosts of that time still linger. Sometimes old wounds do not heal as cleanly as we hope. Jon tilted his head. You mean the Targaryens? Ned's chest tightened. He had always been careful around Jon about speaking of the Targaryens, uncertain what flickers might awaken if he heard too much. But the boy was not ignorant. He had read some of the histories in Winterfell's library, and he knew that House Targaryen had once ruled the Seven Kingdoms. Among others, Ned admitted, there are those who served the Targaryens who lost loved ones when the dynasty fell. Some hold grudges or cling to old loyalties. Sometimes that leads them to do rash things. He watched Jon carefully, but the boy only nodded, thoughtful. I understand. Ned swallowed, nodding in return. I only tell you this because, in time, you may hear whispers. People will say things about me, about my friends, about Robert, and about those who served the old king. Remember, my boy, not all that is whispered is true, and not all that is true should be whispered. Jon blinked at the gravity in his father's voice. I will remember. Is there trouble coming? Ned wished he could say no, but he had been gone too long from King's Landing politics to be sure. Robert's court was rife with intrigue. The Lannisters, the Tyrells, Varys with his spies, Littlefinger with his cunning. The realm was stable enough for now, but a single spark could ignite chaos. And if Jon's parentage were revealed, that spark would burn hotter than dragonfire. It is my duty to ensure that no trouble comes to our gates, Ned said. But if it does, I will face it. That is what it means to be the Lord of Winterfell. And you as my... He caught himself on the word. As my son. He exhaled. As a member of my household, you need not worry. Just continue to train, to learn, to grow into a good man. Jon gave a small smile, though a hint of sadness lingered in his eyes. Yes, father. Ned reached out and clasped Jon's hand briefly. Off with you, then. I'm sure your siblings are eager to see you again. We will speak later. Jon rose, bowed his head, and left. Alone in the solar, Ned stared at the crackling flames, his mind drawn to the image of Arthur Dayne's determined face. The old legends claimed that dawn was forged from the heart of a fallen star. Sometimes Ned wondered if men like Arthur were carved from something equally bright, something otherworldly. Arthur had carried the mantle of the greatest knight in the realm. Now that mantle lay hidden under an assumed name in a lonely northern holdfast. Weeks passed, turning into months. Winterfell returned to its usual rhythm of daily chores, training, feasts, and hunts. Maester Luwin continued to send ravens to King's Landing with routine updates, while Ned oversaw matters of justice within his lands. He spent time with his children. Robb tested his mettle against older squires. Sansa studied sewing and the courtesies of ladies at court. Arya caused mischief learning to shoot arrows in secret. Bran clamored to climb every wall. Rickon toddled under Old Nan's watchful eye, and Jon honed his swordsmanship, forging a bond with the castle's master-at-arms, Ser Roderick Castle, whose patience and fairness seemed to soothe the boy's insecurities. Yet Ned's thoughts often drifted northward, beyond the Wolfswood, to the lonely keep where Arthur Dayne dwelled in secret. He wondered how Arthur found the northern climate, how he spent his days among Lord Flint's quiet men. Did he remain cloistered in the keep, or roam the forests in search of solace? Did he slip away at night to train alone, perhaps thinking of the fateful dawn that gave him his name? A moon's turn after Ned's return, word reached him that a small retinue from King's Landing was on its way to Winterfell. At first, Ned expected it to be someone from the court, perhaps a messenger from the king or a minor lord seeking favor. But the name on Maester Luwin's scroll was far more alarming. Ser Jaime Lannister, the Kingslayer, was traveling north. The letter was curt, saying only that he wished to discuss certain matters with the Warden of the North. Ned felt a surge of apprehension. Jaime Lannister rarely left the capital except on the king's business or his own. For him to ride all the way to Winterfell suggested something significant. Ned ordered the guard to remain vigilant. He shared the news with Catelyn, who tried to glean his thoughts, but Ned told her little. He had learned caution over the years. A single misstep could unearth secrets that would imperil Jon and everything Ned held dear. Jaime arrived with a small escort of Lannister men, fewer than a dozen. It was a cold day, the sky overcast, light snow falling. They rode into the courtyard with crimson cloaks fluttering behind them, the gold lion of House Lannister emblazoned on their banners. Ned met them at the gates with a formal welcome, polite but guarded. Jaime dismounted, wearing an expression of mild indifference, though his green eyes flicked around, taking in every detail. "The North suits you, Stark," Jaime said with a trace of a smirk. "Not that I'd ever care to live here. Far too dreary for my taste." Ned inclined his head, ignoring the jibe. "You are welcome as a guest, Ser Jaime. You've come a long way. May I inquire as to the nature of your visit?" Jaime's lips curled, but he did not answer immediately. Instead, he followed Ned into the great hall. Servants brought mulled wine, and the visitors shed their cloaks, trying to warm themselves at the hearth. Catelyn arrived, offering a courteous greeting, her eyes flickering with curiosity. Sansa and Arya peered from behind a pillar, and Robb stood at Ned's side, trying to emulate his father's composure. Jon lingered in the background. Ned spotted him, a silent figure with downcast eyes, as though uncertain if he was meant to be present. In due time, Jaime requested a private audience with Ned. They withdrew to the solar, leaving their guards outside. Jaime leaned casually against a wooden table, swirling a cup of wine, while Ned stood a few paces away, arms folded. "I won't mince words," Jaime began, voice low. "King Robert has been restless. There have been rumors, whispers of Targaryen loyalists gathering in secret. One might think your dealings with them would be minimal given your history. Yet I've heard whispers that Lord Eddard Stark has been traveling south under curious circumstances. I do not enjoy secrets, Stark. Nor does the king." Ned's jaw tightened. "I went south for personal reasons, family matters." Jaime raised a golden eyebrow. "Indeed? Could it have something to do with your sister, the late Lyanna Stark? Or perhaps her child?" Cold dread washed over Ned. The glimmer in Jaime's, I told him that the Kingslayer suspected something. But what exactly did he know? The tension in the air was a coiled serpent, ready to strike. "You speak in riddles, Ser Jaime?" Ned said, trying to keep his voice level. "What child?" "Oh, you know the rumors. That Rhaegar abducted your dear sister. Some claim he dishonored her, fathered a child. Nonsense, of course, as far as the official story goes. She died of a fever, no child survived. Yet certain parties remain unconvinced." Jaime took a slow sip of wine, regarding Ned over the rim of the cup. "My father always taught me to be thorough. Any loose ends can unravel entire kingdoms. Wouldn't you agree?" Ned's fists clenched, nails biting into his palms. "I did not realize you were in the habit of chasing old wives' tales." Jaime shrugged, setting his cup down. I chase only what the king commands me to chase. Robert has an old hatred for Targaryens, as we all know. If there's even a whisper of a Targaryen heir lurking about, it's my duty as a Kingsguard to investigate. Ned inhaled slowly, keeping his anger in check. You know as well as I do that the last Targaryens are across the sea. Viserys and Daenerys. They pose little immediate threat. A faint smirk tugged at Jaime's mouth. True, yet the king sees shadows everywhere. He's grown suspicious, moody. He remembers how you found your sister in that tower with 3 of the Kingsguard. That day remains a puzzle. You alone survived, along with that Crannogman. And the Kingsguard knights, Arthur Dayne, Oswell Went, Gerald Hightower, were found dead. Or so the story goes. But it's all a bit too neat, isn't it? Ned felt the air chill even more, as though winter's cold had seeped into the very marrow of his bones. Men died there, Sir Jaime. Good men. And I lost my sister. That is the truth of the matter. Jaime studied him, searching for any crack in his resolve. Finally, he broke the silence with a lazy drawl. Of course. So you deny any knowledge of hidden heirs or living Kingsguard members. If that is your stance, I will report as much to the king. Ned forced himself to nod. I deny it. There are no hidden heirs here, Sir Jaime. He did not have to lie about the existence of one Targaryen child, because as far as the realm knew, Jon was a Snow. That was a slight comfort in the face of Jaime's scrutiny. Very well, Jaime said. Then my journey here has been wasted time. Pity I do hate the cold. I'll take my men and depart on the morrow. Unless you have some hospitality to offer. Ned understood the undertones. Jaime wished to remain for a short while, to sniff around Winterfell, to see if anything seemed out of place. Ned forced a courteous smile. You are welcome to stay as long as you like, though we have no southern luxuries here. Only the comforts of the north. Jaime chuckled, his tone laced with sarcasm. How delightful. They left the solar, each man wearing a polite mask for the benefit of the onlookers. The tension, however, did not abate. Ned spent the rest of the day on edge, aware of Jaime's presence in the castle. The Lannister knight prowled the corridors, nodded at the Stark children, made conversation with servants, and occasionally flashed a wolfish grin at Ned, as if to say, I am watching. Come nightfall, a feast of sorts was held in Jaime's honor. Nothing grand, but enough to mark the presence of a king's brother-in-law. Jaime bantered with Robb, complimented Sansa, teased Arya about the needle by her side. Catelyn maintained polite composure, though Ned could sense her unease. Jon kept himself at a distance, eating quietly, trying not to draw attention. Ned noticed Jaime's eyes flicker toward Jon once or twice, as if measuring him. Ned's heart pounded, but Jaime said nothing directly. Later that night, Ned went to his solar again, pacing in front of the dying embers of the fireplace. If Jaime persisted, how long before the man learned of Arthur Dayne's survival? That knowledge would upend the realm. Jaime had been a Kingsguard during the rebellion. The news that the Sword of the Mourning yet lived would spark questions. And if those questions led to Jon's heritage, everything would crumble. Ned found himself wishing he could warn Arthur. But sending a raven to Flint's Keep risked exposure. He would have to trust that Arthur's isolation was sufficient. Jaime lingered at Winterfell for 3 days, each day making small talk, subtly prying for any sign of betrayal. Ned showed him nothing. He busied himself with routine matters of justice and administration, keeping the Lannisters at arm's length. He made sure Jon was occupied, out of the way to avoid further scrutiny. On the morning of the 4th day, Jaime prepared to depart. Ned joined him in the courtyard as the Lannister men saddled their horses. Snow drifted lazily, dusting the ground in white. Well, Lord Stark, Jaime said, cinching his cloak around him. Thank you for your hospitality. I trust you will visit King's Landing soon, so that the king does not feel neglected. Ned offered a thin smile. I have no plans to travel south at present. My duties are here, but send my regards to the king. Jaime mounted his horse with smooth grace, every inch the Golden Knight. His men gathered around him in a tight formation. I will. May the North keep you well, and your secrets. His parting words stung like a barb. Ned stood there, watching as the Lannisters rode out, red cloaks vanishing into the drifting snow. The courtyard felt emptier, colder. Ned turned back toward the keep, mind swirling with what Jaime might report to the king. If Robert's suspicions grew, more eyes would turn north, to Ned's travels to the Tower of Joy. Sooner or later, it might lead them to Arthur. Days turned into weeks once more, and the immediate danger seemed to pass. No word came from King's Landing beyond the usual administrative missives. Winterfell remained calm, though Ned could sense the subtle shift in the air. He knew King Robert, a man of quick tempers and deep resentments. If the slightest rumor confirmed his worst fears, that a Targaryen child lived, he would ride north himself or send half the realm's forces to root out the threat. Ned found himself longing to see Arthur, to share the news, to plan for the future. But traveling again so soon could arouse suspicion. Instead, he waited, hoping that Arthur would not stray from the keep, hoping that Lord Flint kept their secret well. Ned took what comfort he could in his daily routines, in the presence of his children, and in the quiet strength of Winterfell's ancient walls. One particularly cold night, a few months after Jaime's visit, Ned sat in the great hall with a cup of mulled wine, hearing the latest petitions from his vassals. The day's proceedings had been long and dull. Disputes over grazing rights, complaints about a pack of wolves near a village, minor quarrels among peasants. Ned's mind drifted, weary of the small matters when greater dangers loomed behind the scenes. At last, the hall cleared, and Ned rose, stretching the stiffness from his muscles. Catelyn touched his arm gently. "You're troubled, husband." He mustered a faint smile. "Am I so transparent?" She studied him with concern. A wife learns to read the lines on her husband's brow. "You've been distant since you returned from the south. I know it was not merely old war business. You never did share the truth with me." Ned glanced away, the weight of secrets heavy in his chest. He loved Catelyn, but he could not betray Lyanna's final wish. And now Arthur's survival added another layer of complexity. "Some matters are best left buried, Cat. For your own safety, for our family's safety. I pray you trust me in this." She sighed, nodding reluctantly. "I do trust you, Ned, but secrets weigh on a man's soul." He pressed a soft kiss to her brow. "They do, but I will bear them if it keeps us safe." That night, Ned found sleep elusive. He rose from bed, careful not to wake Catelyn, and donned a cloak. The corridor was dimly lit by torches, and the winter wind whistled through the cracks in the old stone. Ned made his way to the courtyard, where he stood gazing at the stars, trying to calm his restless thoughts. Suddenly, a soft voice spoke behind him. "Father!" He turned, finding Jon shivering slightly at the entrance to the courtyard, dressed in a simple cloak over his nightshirt. The boy looked hesitant to approach. "Jon," Ned said, "it's late. You should be abed." Jon stepped forward, arms crossed against the cold. "I couldn't sleep. I had a dream." Ned noted the fear in Jon's eyes. "What sort of dream?" Jon swallowed, glancing up at the sky. "I dreamt of a tower, of swords clashing, and screams echoing through stone walls. A woman wept, and her voice, it called a name, but I couldn't hear it clearly." Ned felt his blood run cold. Jon's words evoked the memory of the Tower of Joy, of Lyanna's pleas. The boy had never been told any details of that day, yet the dream seemed to echo the reality. Was this some echo of his Targaryen blood, the so-called dragon dreams that legends spoke of? Or was it mere coincidence, the product of overhearing rumors or stories? He forced a gentle tone. "It was just a dream, Jon. Dreams can be cruel, but they're not real." Jon studied his father's face, as if searching for comfort he wasn't sure he'd find. "I know." Still, it felt important, as though I needed to understand it. Ned knelt beside the boy, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You are safe here, Jon. Winterfell is your home." Jon nodded, though uncertainty still clouded his features. "Thank you, father." Ned rose, guiding the boy back inside. He watched Jon return to his chambers, a swirl of guilt and dread curling in his stomach. The boy was growing older. The seeds of truth might be stirring in his mind, whether through rumor, intuition, or fate. Ned had to wonder, how long could he keep the secret hidden? How long until Jon's heritage revealed itself like the dawn? In that silent corridor, Ned Stark felt the shadow of Arthur Dayne's vow pressing upon him, the echo of Lyanna's final plea, and the roar of Robert's fury. He bowed his head, muttering a prayer to the old gods for guidance, for strength, for the wisdom to know when to speak and when to remain silent. Beyond the walls, the winter wind keened like a mourner in the darkness, carrying the unspoken hope that somewhere out there, the sword of the morning stood watch, living proof that not all that was believed dead was truly gone. And in the vast tapestry of fate that stretched across Westeros, their secret pulsed like a hidden star, waiting for the day when its light would inevitably break free. Ned Stark slept fitfully after guiding Jon back to his chamber, plagued by the restless stirrings of old memories. The wind battered the walls of Winterfell, howling through the courtyard like a wounded beast. When morning broke at last, thin and pallid, he rose from his bed still feeling a bone-deep fatigue, as though he had wrestled with ghosts through the long night. A part of him feared he actually had. He forced himself through a routine that felt strangely hollow, dressing for the day, breaking his fast in the great hall, exchanging a few quiet words with Catelyn. She observed the tension in his eyes, but he offered no explanation. He had told her he carried secrets. That much was true, yet not even in her presence could he find the right words. Telling the truth would endanger her, endanger all of them. After the morning meal, he made his way toward the training yard, knowing Ser Roderick Castle would already be putting the boys through their paces. Outside, the sky was a dull iron gray. A fine, wind-blown snow drifted through the bailey. The northern winter was only in its early breath, but the chill stung Ned's cheeks. Servants scurried by, huddling under cloaks, and stable hands wrestled with reluctant horses. In the training yard, he found Robb, Theon Greyjoy, and Jon practicing with wooden swords against a trio of older squires. Ser Roderick stood close by, barking instructions. Bran peered from the sidelines, perched atop a fence post despite the cold, his big eyes bright with excitement. Even little Rickon toddled around near old Nan, though she kept him at a safe distance. Arya was lurking behind a pillar. No doubt she would slip away to shoot arrows once no one was watching. Sansa was inside, likely with Septa Mordain, focusing on her lessons in courtesy. Each child was drawn to a different pursuit, yet they were all Ned's children in their own way, even if the realm did not see it so. As Ned approached, Robb landed a swift blow on one of the squires, his stance controlled but forceful. Theon, moving with a touch of swagger, tried a fancier maneuver and ended up staggering when his opponent deflected him. Jon, quieter in his style, used precise footwork. He took advantage of an opening the squire offered, striking the young man in the side with a solid whack of the wooden blade. The squire yelped, and Ser Roderick was quick to admonish him to keep his guard up. Jon seemed almost surprised by his own success. Ned watched from a distance, arms folded, assessing. Each of the boys had grown in skill since the last time he had closely observed their sparring. Robb was coming into his own as heir to Winterfell. Theon had speed and confidence but sometimes lacked caution. Jon had an intensity that belied his youth, fueled perhaps by a desire to prove himself worthy of the Stark name he would never truly bear. He had the makings of a fine swordsman. When the session ended, the boys were all breathing hard, cheeks pink from cold and exertion. Ser Roderick gave them a few pointers before sending them to put away their practice swords. As Jon turned, he spotted Ned by the yard's edge. There was a flicker in his eyes, perhaps still haunted by the dreams of the night before. Yet the boy tried to hide it. Ned nodded in acknowledgement. He wanted to speak to Jon, to ensure the boy was well, but he sensed Jon would be uncomfortable with too much attention in front of the others. So Ned waited until Theon dragged Robb off to the great hall, both of them laughing about some foolish bet, and Jon lingered, uncertain whether to follow. "Jon," Ned said softly, drawing him aside. Bran hopped down from the fence post and scampered after Robb, giving Ned and Jon space. You fought well today. Thank you, father, Jon replied, bowing his head in deference. His hair, damp with sweat, curled against his forehead. Ned placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, feeling the tension in his muscles. How did you sleep after we spoke? Jon lowered his eyes. Better. No more dreams. That I remember. Perhaps it was nothing. Ned considered what to say. He did not want to dismiss Jon's concerns, but neither could he affirm them. If the dream troubles you again, come to me. Dreams are often just that, dreams, but sometimes they tell us things about ourselves we haven't yet understood. Jon blinked, an earnest light in his gaze. Yes, father. Ned patted the boy's shoulder once more, then let him go. He watched Jon walk away, head bowed, carrying the weight of a secret he did not even fully know. That sight caused a pang in Ned's chest. If only I could tell you who you truly are. But he could not. Not yet. He turned and found Ser Rodrik watching him with thoughtful eyes. The old master-at-arms stroked his whiskers, clearing his throat. The boy is improving, he noted, nodding at Jon's retreating form. Each day, he focuses harder than before. He has a fierce determination, Ned said quietly. That should serve him well wherever he goes. Ser Rodrik frowned, as if reading more into the comment than Ned intended. But he said nothing. Instead, he gestured for Ned to accompany him across the yard, away from any curious ears. The snow crunched beneath their boots. Up on the ramparts, a pair of guards huddled with spears, gazing out over Winterfell's domain. My lord, Ser Rodrik said in a low voice, I know the official word is that your journey south was just a private matter, but the men whisper. They've heard that the Kingslayer paid us a visit soon after your return, that he asked strange questions. Ned regarded the older man carefully. Men often whisper. Jaime Lannister came, asked about old battles, and left. So I told them, Ser Rodrik said. But if I may speak freely, I worry about you, my lord. The Lannisters are not known for letting matters rest, especially not Ser Jaime. Ned sighed. Your concern is appreciated, old friend, but trust that I know what I'm doing. If trouble stirs, I will not face it unprepared. Ser Rodrik bowed. As you say, my lord. They parted ways. Ned headed back into the keep, his heart heavy. He passed through the great hall, where Theon was entertaining some guardsmen with a boastful tale of how he once bested 3 ironborn reavers in a skirmish. Robb listened with a mixture of admiration and skepticism. Jon stood on the outskirts, silent. Ned's gaze lingered briefly. One day, the difference in their stations would become more stark, no pun intended, and that day would weigh upon them both. Eventually, Ned retreated to his solar, where Maester Luwin awaited him with the day's messages. Most were mundane. Petitions from minor lords, updates on trading caravans, the business of the north that never ceased. But amidst the parchment scrolls was one that made Ned's pulse quicken. It bore a broken seal of House Flint. Luwin handed it over, saying nothing, for he knew well how to keep counsel. Ned dismissed the maester and opened the letter with careful hands. The script was rough, as though the writer had difficulty putting pen to parchment. Perhaps it was the hand of Lord Flint himself, or someone under his command who was unpracticed with letters. It read, To Lord Stark, I send this in confidence. Your man remains safe within my walls, but there have been rumors spreading among the small folk nearby. Some speak of a swordsman too skilled to be a simple hedge knight. A traveler passing through asked questions. It claimed a Lannister man had offered coin for information. I have done my best to suppress such talk, but it grows. Advise me soon if more discretion is needed. Flint. Ned's breath caught. Clearly, Jaime Lannister had done more than simply pry around Winterfell. He had cast out lines across the north, seeking any strange rumors, any man who did not quite fit. The mention of a swordsman too skilled could only mean Arthur. No matter that he went by a false name, Arthur's very bearing and prowess could draw suspicion. He clenched his jaw, anger at Jaime warring with concern for Arthur's safety. If travelers talked freely, someone might guess the truth. Even if they did not deduce that the mysterious man was Sir Arthur Dayne himself, they might conclude he was a fugitive from the rebellion years. Any threat to his secrecy was a threat to Jon. Perhaps it was time to move Arthur somewhere else, or to warn him to keep his head down even more. Ned took a candle and burnt the letter until only ash remained. Then he rose, paced the solar. His mind spun. He could not simply ride out immediately, that might fan the rumors. But letting them fester was even riskier. He needed a ruse, a plausible reason to leave Winterfell again without drawing suspicion. As he was still wrestling with the problem, a voice called from beyond the door. "My lord," Maester Luwin said, "a visitor requests audience. He carries a letter sealed with the sigil of the king." Ned's heart sank. A letter from Robert could be anything. A summons, a complaint, an announcement. He braced himself, beckoning Luwin to enter. The maester guided in a messenger wearing the crown and stag badge of King Robert. The man doffed his hood, revealing a face reddened by the cold, and bowed stiffly. "My Lord Stark, I come from King's Landing with a message from His Grace." He held out a rolled parchment, sealed with the royal sigil in thick crimson wax. Ned's eyes flickered to Luwin, who inclined his head gravely. Dismissively, Ned told the messenger to wait in the corridor. He broke the seal and read, half expecting an order to appear at court. Instead, it was an invitation, or a command disguised as an invitation. Robert intended to journey north in half a year's time, once the roads were passable for a royal procession in the milder months, to visit Winterfell personally and to attend a grand hunt. The letter was full of Robert's usual boisterous phrases, calling Ned his old friend, and speaking of how they should drink and feast and hunt side by side again. Ned's stomach nodded. Robert coming here. That would bring half the court, the Kingsguard, and likely Cersei and her Lannister retinue. The one bright spot was that it would not be immediate. He had time, months at least, to ensure that no suspicious circumstances were present in the north. But the sudden notion of Robert's presence was unnerving. If the king got wind of any Targaryen secrets, the consequences would be grave. He sank into a chair, the parchment crackling in his hands. He could not refuse the king's visit. Nor could he simply vanish south with no explanation, not when a royal procession was forthcoming. Yet if rumors about a hidden knight persisted near Flint's lands, and the Lannisters had enough time to follow those whispers, everything could unravel. Quietly, he summoned Maester Luwin again. "Write a reply," Ned said. "Thank the king for his gracious words, and tell him that Winterfell stands ready to receive him whenever he wishes to come." Luwin bowed, eyes reflecting a flicker of concern. "Yes, my lord. And is there anything else you wish to convey?" Ned shook his head. "No. Send it swiftly by raven. The messenger can rest a night and depart at dawn. He's come a long way." The maester withdrew, leaving Ned alone once more. He set the king's letter aside, mind returning to Lord Flint's note about Arthur. He had to act, but cunningly. With the king's approach still half a year away, Ned had a narrow window to handle these matters in secret. The more time that passed, the more likely the Lannisters would uncover something that would lead them to Flint's keep. He decided on a plan that evening. A small hunting trip, perhaps. He would gather a few men, head north under the guise of seeking game in the deep woods, and then slip away for a brief visit to Flint's holdfast. He could consult with Arthur face to face, gauge how best to proceed. The mere thought of seeing the sword of the mourning again twisted Ned's thoughts into knots. But there was no other way. Letters were too dangerous. The next day, Ned set his plan in motion. He mentioned to Catelyn that he intended to visit some of the more remote bannermen for matters of land distribution and to hunt along the way. She looked at him with concern. 2 journeys south in such a short time was unusual, but he assured her it was routine. He reminded her of Robert's letter, and she seemed to accept that Ned wanted to finalize northern business before the king's arrival. If she suspected anything, she did not voice it. He chose a small party: Jory Castle, the captain of his guard, Tomard, an older, trustworthy retainer, and 5 men-at-arms known for their discretion. He considered bringing Theon or even Robb, but decided against it. This journey demanded secrecy, not additional eyes. So one frosty morning, with the sun half lost behind thick clouds, the hunting party rode out from Winterfell. Jon watched them depart from a tower window, his expression unreadable. The group traveled swiftly, avoiding the major roads and instead cutting through forest paths. The cold deepened each night, forcing them to bundle themselves in thick cloaks around small fires, always vigilant for roaming wolves or worse. But the men were stalwart, well used to northern hardships. As they drew closer to Lord Flint's domain, the terrain turned rougher. Great stands of pine and fir crowded steep slopes, and the snow grew deeper underfoot. Jory guided them through, for he had once scouted these lands on Ned's behalf. They passed a few scattered villages where ragged farmers gaped at them from rickety cabins. Jory exchanged a few words with the locals, gleaning scraps of gossip. Yes, travelers had come through, men who carried Lannister gold, they said. The travelers asked about a swordsman in Flint's keep. That was enough to set Ned's teeth on edge. Finally, they reached the outskirts of Flint's holdfast. It stood perched atop a craggy ridge overlooking a frozen river. The walls were old, dark stone, patched in places where years of northern winters had worn them away. A few watchmen in fur cloaks peered down at the arrivals, horns slung across their backs. Lord Flint himself emerged into the courtyard to greet Ned, stiff-legged with age, thick gray brows knit against the cold. The moment Ned dismounted, the old lord gave him a curt bow. "My Lord Stark, you come at a most needed time. We've had more than one man skulking near these parts, seeking rumors. I've sent them away empty-handed, but they asked too many questions." Ned nodded grimly. "You did right, my lord. Is our friend within?" He kept his voice low. Even here he feared watchful ears. Flint inclined his head. "In his chambers, as far as I know. He rarely mingles with my men, which is best." Ned wasted no time. Leaving Jory and the others to see to the horses and arrange lodging, he climbed the worn stone steps leading into the keep. The corridors smelled of smoke and damp, the air thick with chill. At the end of a narrow hallway, he found the door to Arthur's quarters. 2 of Flint's guards stood watch, but they stepped aside upon seeing Ned. He knocked softly. A beat passed, then the latch clicked. Arthur Dayne stood in the door, a hooded cloak thrown over his shoulders, plain breeches and tunic beneath. Even without regal attire, the man carried himself with quiet nobility. His hair, once silver gold, was now more subdued, and a faint scar marked his cheek where time and battles had left their mark. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. 2 men bound by the same secret, each aware of the peril. "Lord Stark," Arthur said at last, stepping aside to admit Ned. Ned entered a modest room furnished with a single cot, a table, and a chair near a small hearth. In the corner lay a plain long sword in a battered scabbard, no sign of the legendary Dawn. A single window cut through the wall, revealing a glimpse of the snow-covered courtyard below. Arthur closed the door, leaning against it. "I wondered if you would come." Ned nodded. "I received your message through Flint. He wrote that strangers have been sniffing around, men who might be in Lannister employ. We cannot dismiss this threat." Arthur's expression tightened, a flicker of old burdens haunting his eyes. "They came a fortnight past. I stayed out of sight, yet 1 or 2 of them lingered to speak with the servants. I overheard mention of a mysterious hedge knight with a skill beyond reason. They spoke of golden coin for anyone providing proof of a name. Lord Flint intervened, but I fear more will come." Ned released a slow breath, pacing the small space. "Jaime Lannister visited Winterfell not long after I returned. He asked about the Tower of Joy, about Targaryen heirs, about dead Kingsguard. I denied all, but the man is no fool. If he's paying coin, he must suspect something." Arthur folded his arms, gazed distant. "If I am discovered, the first question will be, why is Arthur Dayne alive? The second, what cause keeps him here, hidden in the north?" Ned's mind churned with the dire consequences. And that leads inevitably to Jon. Arthur nodded once. Precisely. For a moment they said nothing. The wind pressed against the shutter of the narrow window. Ned's thoughts flew to Jon, the boy's searching eyes, his dream of swords clashing in a tower. He pictured Robert Baratheon's thunderous wrath if the truth came to light. At length, Ned looked up, meeting Arthur's gaze. "We must relocate you. Flint's keep is compromised. If Lannister gold is in the wind, sooner or later they'll find some witness who saw too much. Even a glimpse of your face might be enough to rouse suspicion." Arthur's lips thinned in reluctant agreement. "Where would you have me go?" Ned considered. "Anywhere south of the Neck is too risky. The closer we go to King's Landing, the more eyes. Across the sea is an option. But if rumors followed you to Essos, the exiled Targaryen prince might learn of your survival and try to rally you to his cause. That could be worse for Jon in the end." Arthur grimaced. "I won't serve Viserys. My oath was to Prince Rhaegar and his child, not to the Mad King's last son." "I feared you'd say as much," Ned said quietly. "And the boy you swore to protect is here. We can't risk some entanglement in Essos that would blow back on him." They traded glances, understanding how limited their options truly were. The north was vast, with plenty of remote corners, but no place was wholly safe if Lannister men came sniffing. "The Wall," Arthur offered suddenly, voice subdued. "Men say the Night's Watch is ever hungry for new recruits, but I am no youth, nor a criminal. Still, if I joined the Watch, I could vanish. The vow would bind me, but it would also protect me from outside claims. No one would question a wandering sword if he took the black." Ned's brow furrowed. The idea was not without logic. The Watch needed men, especially skilled men. Their vow was for life, sealing away a person's past. If Arthur Dayne appeared at Castle Black as some unknown southerner or lesser knight seeking penance, it might pass, assuming no one recognized him. But the risk was if a single old crow who fought in the rebellion realized who he truly was, that knowledge might spread. "Too many veterans of the rebellion end up on the Wall," Ned said, half to himself. "A fair number of old knights, second sons, men who might recall your face. Even if your name is never spoken, it only takes one to remember." Arthur inclined his head. "True. And yet, the Watch is a place of anonymity. Men rarely ask about your past. Many wish to forget their own. If we are careful, I could live out my days as a sworn brother. I'd still be in the north, near enough if Jon ever needed me. I could keep my vow in spirit." Ned fell silent, weighing the possibility. He envisioned Arthur in the black cloak, patrolling the Wall under command of Jeor Mormont, or Thorne, or Bowen Marsh, or any number of watchful eyes. The notion carried real danger, but also a certain sense of finality. Once a man took the black, he was a brother for life, no family, no lands, no crown. Arthur Dayne would truly be dead to the world, replaced by a nameless crow. Before Ned could reply, Arthur spoke again, gentler. "I see your hesitance, Lord Stark. I do not wish to rush. But if men are hunting me, staying in a keep under your bannerman's protection will only draw suspicion to House Stark. We can't allow Jon's secret to be threatened. For my part, I have no future in these lands unless it is a future spent watching from the shadows. Perhaps that is my penance." Ned exhaled slowly. "You owe no penance, Sir Arthur. You did only what your oath demanded. That day at the Tower of Joy, we were on opposite sides of a war neither of us chose. Even so, I respect you, and I will not force you to the Watch unless there is no other way." Arthur's eyes were steady. "I have considered it often. The path is mine to choose. Only, if you see a better path, I will hear it." Ned hesitated, then crossed to the narrow window. Snow drifted outside in gentle flurries. The hush of it calmed his racing mind. "The truth is, I see few options. King Robert rides to Winterfell in half a year. That will bring half the realm's attention to the north. If you remain here, hidden in some smaller keep, more travelers will note a new face. More gold will flow from Lannister hands. Sooner or later, you'd be found." Arthur joined Ned by the window, the two men gazing at the courtyard below. Lord Flint was down there, speaking with Jory Castle. The old lord wore a heavy bearskin cloak. "So we are agreed," Arthur said quietly. "The Night's Watch. It may be the only shield left for me, and for Jon." Ned turned and faced the knight fully. He looked into those haunted eyes, recalling the unstoppable warrior who had nearly slain him all those years ago. He thought of the enormous irony. Arthur had once been among the most storied knights in the Seven Kingdoms, sworn to protect a royal house. Now he would forsake land and title, identity and ambition, to stand atop a frozen wall at the edge of the world. "Very well," Ned said at length. "If that is your wish, I'll make the arrangements. But we must do it carefully. If we announce that a southerner rides for the wall, it might raise questions. You'll need a new name, a new backstory, something beyond Gerald Hill, something that draws less attention." Arthur nodded. "I am ready." They spent the next hours in hushed conversation, hammering out the details. Arthur would feign being a common-born knight from the Stormlands, disgraced after a lost duel, seeking a clean slate by taking the black. He would travel under Ned's escort as if discovered along the way. Once at Castle Black, Ned would speak to the Lord Commander, Jeor Mormont, to expedite Arthur's acceptance without formal fuss. Most men would be relieved to add a skilled warrior to their ranks, no matter his background. Night fell by the time they finished planning. Arthur insisted on leaving as soon as possible, but Ned counseled a short delay. First, Ned must fabricate a plausible sequence of events in which he encountered this knight on the road, heard his story, and offered him the chance to join the watch. The fewer men at Flint's Keep who saw Arthur depart with Ned, the better. Thus, 2 nights later, Ned quietly led Arthur out a postern gate under the cover of darkness, accompanied by Jory Castle alone. Lord Flint watched from the shadows, offering a solemn nod. He promised to quell any rumors by claiming the mysterious hedge knight had left on his own in the dead of night, apparently heading south. Meanwhile, Ned would lead Arthur on a winding path northward. It was a bitterly cold journey. A howling wind scoured their faces as they rode, but they pressed on. Arthur kept his hood drawn low. If they encountered local villagers, Ned let them assume Arthur was just another retainer from Winterfell. Their party was small enough, only Ned, Jory, and Arthur, that few questions arose. They moved west to avoid known roads, crossing half-frozen rivers and trudging through pine forests. Once, they saw a band of travelers in Lannister livery passing along a distant ridge, but Ned's group stayed hidden in thick woods until they were gone. No one confronted them. No one recognized Arthur's face. Yet Ned felt tension coil in his gut with each league they traveled. The land itself seemed austere and foreboding. He took it as an omen of how narrow their path was. One misstep and everything could come crashing down. On the 10th day of travel, they crested a rise to see, far in the distance, the wall itself, a vast and glimmering barrier of ice stretching from horizon to horizon. Even for Ned, who had visited the wall more than once, the sight always struck him with awe and a deep, unsettling humility. The wind was sharper here, an endless gust that whirled the snow into translucent curtains across the plains. Arthur stared in silence for a time, his breath pluming in the chill air. "I've heard tales of this wonder," he said quietly. "Yet the reality surpasses all telling. It is like a frozen titan laid on its side." Ned nodded. "A gift from the first men or the children of the forest, or both, depending on which tale you believe. Either way, it's older than memory." He thought of how the wall represented duty and sacrifice, a place where men gave up everything for the realm's protection. It seemed oddly fitting that Arthur Dayne would end up here, forced by fate to protect the realm in secret rather than on a king's dais. They pressed on, making better time now that the way was more recognizable. The closer they got, the more patrols they encountered, black-clad rangers out scouting or hunting game. These men greeted Ned Stark respectfully, for he was the warden of the north and recognized Jory Castle. They did not spare more than a passing glance for Arthur, who kept to the rear, hood drawn. At last, they reached Castle Black, a sprawling fortress of dark stone and wooden towers pressed against the looming wall. Smoke rose from chimneys, and men bustled about, brothers of the watch, stable hands, blacksmiths, the occasional steward. Most were too busy with their own tasks to give more than a quick nod as Ned arrived. The gate opened to admit them, and inside they were promptly greeted by a pair of black brothers. "Well met, Lord Stark," said one, a stout man with a patchy beard. "We heard you might be coming north. The Lord Commander is in his solar." Ned thanked him and dismounted, passing the reins to a stable boy. Jory and Arthur did the same. As they crossed the courtyard, Arthur's eyes flicked around, absorbing every detail of this new, barren life. Ned could sense tension in the knight's posture. Once Arthur had walked the gilded halls of the Red Keep. Now these sooty, wind-battered walls would become his home. They found Lord Commander Jeor Mormont in his solar, poring over a map by candlelight. The old bear looked up, a flash of relief crossing his craggy features at the sight of Ned. "Lord Stark," he said in his gruff voice, "I'd not expected you for another moon's turn or more, but I suppose winter is full of surprises." Ned inclined his head. "Lord Commander, I come with matters to discuss. May we speak privately?" Jeor eyed Jory and Arthur. Jory Castle bowed respectfully, and Arthur stood still, hood still obscuring part of his face. Mormont gave a curt nod. "My steward, bring some mulled wine," he called to a young brother by the door. Then he motioned for the rest to leave. "All right, the three of you may stay, but close that door." When they were alone, Ned took a breath. "Lord Commander, I bring you a potential new recruit for the Night's Watch." Mormont glanced at Arthur. "A recruit? We can always use more men so long as they understand the oath." "Do you come of your own free will, sir?" Arthur lowered his hood, revealing a plain face with no markings except that faint scar. He offered a respectful bow. "Aye, my lord. My name is—" He paused briefly. "My name is Aaron Storm. I'm a knight from the Stormlands, fallen on misfortune. I wish to take the black and serve with honor, leaving my past behind." Ned waited, heart pounding, praying the name would not stir recognition. Aaron Storm suggested bastardy from the Stormlands. It was a plausible fiction. He had considered calling Arthur by some other name entirely, but they agreed that Storm might explain certain aspects of his accent, which was faintly southern. Jeor Mormont ran a hand over his beard, studying Aaron with piercing eyes. "We do not turn away volunteers, though I'd like to know the nature of this misfortune." Arthur bowed his head again, putting on the humble act they had rehearsed. "I lost my lands in a duel that ended poorly. My family was not well regarded, so I have no resources to reclaim. I know how to wield a sword, but not how to live with the shame. The black is my refuge." Mormont grunted. "A story as old as the Watch itself." "Very well, if Lord Stark vouches for you, that's enough for me. Understand that once you say the words, there's no leaving. You'll be a brother of the Night's Watch until death. All that you were before, titles, loyalties, feuds, become nothing." Arthur nodded. "I understand, my lord." The old bear fixed him with a final appraising stare, then turned to Ned. "We've had a lean season, as you know. The Watch is under strength. Men desert or men die and we don't get replacements. A knight can be of good use to us, especially one who can train recruits." He lifted his gaze to Arthur. "But don't expect special treatment just because you were once a knight. You'll start as a recruit, same as the others." Arthur bowed. "I ask for no privilege, only a chance." Jeor waved a hand. "Then let it be so." He turned to Ned. "You have my thanks, Lord Stark. I gather you'll stay a few days? We can set him in quarters, see what tasks he's fit for. I'd have him do some sword work with our master-at-arms to gauge his skill." Ned cleared his throat. "Yes, we can stay a short time. I must return to Winterfell soon. King Robert will visit in the coming year, and there's much to prepare, but I'd like to see this matter through. Aaron Storm accompanied me, after all. I'd see him settled." Jeor nodded. "As you wish." They moved to a side table, where a tired steward arrived with cups of mulled wine. Jeor poured for Ned and Jory, and offered one to Arthur. The former sword of the morning accepted it quietly, lowering his gaze in what might have been relief or resignation. Ned took a sip of the steaming wine, the warmth steadying him. This was it. Arthur was about to vanish into the black. Once he took the oath, there would be no turning back. Ned wondered if Arthur fully grasped the finality of that step. Then again, what alternative did the man truly have? They spoke of everyday matters, rations at Castle Black, sightings of wildlings beyond the wall, talk of a new recruit who had come from the Westerlands for reasons unknown. Ned listened half attentively, but his mind was on Arthur. His gaze flicked to the man's face from time to time, trying to discern any sign of regret. Arthur kept his composure. Only once did Ned see a ghost of sadness pass over his eyes, when Gior casually mentioned that King Robert's name day had been celebrated with grand hunts in the past. Arthur said nothing, but Ned guessed what he was thinking. That once, the Kingsguard might have attended such events, Ser Arthur in gleaming armor beside Rhaegar, or perhaps beside Prince Lewin Martell and Ser Barristan Selmy. All that had ended in blood and ashes. Eventually, the old bear excused himself to check on other matters, leaving them to find lodging for the night. Castle Black was a flurry of activity. Men in black cloaks trudging to and fro with supplies, crows cawing from the rooftops. The sky overhead was a white haze, suggesting more snow soon. Jory went off to secure feed for the horses, while Ned and Arthur found themselves in the armory courtyard. There, a few black brothers were practicing sword work. A lean, hawk-faced man with short-cropped hair stood in the center, barking commands. Ned recognized him as Ser Alliser Thorne. He was drilling a handful of raw recruits who looked exhausted, their wooden swords drooping. Thorne had no kindness in his manner. He spotted Ned and Arthur and gave them a curt nod. Ned had encountered Thorne before, but not often. The man was exiled to the Wall after supporting House Targaryen in the rebellion. Irony abounded. Here was another Targaryen loyalist in black, though Thorne had not been part of Rhaegar's inner circle. Ned quietly led Arthur past them without introduction, not wanting to linger. Thorne's suspicious eye flicked over them, but he said nothing. Ned did not doubt that if Thorne recognized the famed Sword of the Mourning, he would store that information for later use. A man like Alliser Thorne thrived on secrets that might grant him leverage. They made their way to a small barracks near the eastern side of the castle. This would be Arthur's home until he proved himself enough to be assigned better quarters, if any such existed in the Watch. They stepped inside a cramped chamber lined with narrow bunks. A single brazier gave off weak heat. Arthur surveyed the surroundings, face impassive. "It's serviceable," he said. "Better than some places I've stayed in hiding." Ned almost smiled at the understatement. "Tomorrow you'll be introduced to the others formally. Then, once Mormont arranges it, you'll take your oath before the weirwood in the haunted forest, or in the septier if you prefer. Which would you choose?" Arthur's mouth tightened. "I was raised in the faith of the Seven, but the old gods have watched these lands longer. I'll swear before the heart tree." He hesitated. "I recall your ways from the Tower of Joy. You speak often of the old gods in your devotions. It seems fitting." Ned inclined his head in understanding. "So be it. The old gods see truth in men's hearts, or so I believe. They'll know the sincerity of your vow." Arthur lowered himself onto one of the bunks, as if to test its sturdiness. The bed creaked ominously. A wry twist came to his lips, fleeting as a summer lightning flash. "Perhaps it is best if they see me for who I am now. A man stripped of a name, with only a vow to define him." Ned did not know how to respond. He felt the weight of those words, the loss behind them. Whatever Arthur Dayne had once been, Crown Prince's friend, chivalric legend, Sword of the Mourning, now he would become Aaron Storm, a nameless crow among crows. Ned cleared his throat. "I'll leave you to rest. If you need anything, come find me or Jory." Arthur nodded. Ned turned to leave, but paused in the doorway. "Ser Arthur." He stopped himself, forcing the new name. "Aaron, are you certain of this?" Arthur met his gaze steadily. "I am. For Jon's sake, for your sister's memory, for the vow I swore. A Targaryen child lives, and I can guard that secret best by stepping into the shadows." Ned could only incline his head. Very well. He left the barracks feeling a hollowness settle in his chest, a sensation like final farewell. That night, Ned took supper with Jeor Mormont in the Lord Commander's chamber, joined by Jory and a few senior black brothers. They spoke of trifling matters, the heavy snowfall predicted, the supply lines from Eastwatch, rumors that wildlings were stirring. Ned participated politely, but his mind drifted to the tension lying under every word. He forced himself not to glance at the men's faces to see if any recognized something in Aaron Storm. If anyone did, they gave no sign. After supper, Ned excused himself to walk along the top of the wall. A creaking wooden lift carried him and Jory up the icy face. The cold at that height was fierce, a biting wind that seemed to reach into one's bones. Once at the top, they gazed out across an endless expanse of white. The forest stretched dark and foreboding on the far side, the land of wildlings and worse. On the castle side, the north rolled into the distance, bleak and snowbound. Jory pulled his cloak tight around himself. "My lord, is it wise to leave him here, among men who fought in the rebellion? Men who might have known the Kingsguard's faces?" Ned rested his gloved hands on the icy parapet. "Wise or not, it's our best choice. If he remains hidden among our bannermen, the Lannisters will eventually catch a whisper. Here, the men of the Watch have no loyalty to the crown or House Lannister. They care only about the next meal and surviving the cold. They won't go running with secrets unless they see profit. And profit is scant up here." Jory studied his lord's face in the pale moonlight. "You're placing a great trust in him, my lord." Ned closed his eyes for a moment. "And he in me. Once we drew swords against each other to the death. Now we unite to protect a boy who knows nothing of his heritage. The fates twist in ways I never expected, Jory." They stood there in silence, the wind a low moan across the battlements. Ned thought of Jon, safe in Winterfell, dreaming perhaps of a better future. He thought of Robert's impending visit. He thought of Arthur Dayne, soon to take a vow that would bind him to this frozen place forever. All this for a secret that could topple a king. Early the next morning, Ned rose to find that Arthur was already at the practice yard. He was sparring with a surly brother known as Rast, who sneered at the southern night. But Arthur handled him easily, even holding back so as not to draw too much attention. A few watchers murmured that the new man had skill, but no one voiced suspicion beyond that. Later that day, Jeor Mormont arranged a small ceremony at the weirwood beyond the wall. Accompanied by a handful of black brothers and Ned's own retinue, they ventured through the gate into the haunted forest. Snow-laden branches creaked overhead as they followed a winding trail to a small clearing where a massive heart tree stood. Its bark was bone-white, its leaves a deep crimson, and its carved face wept red sap like dried blood. Arthur knelt there, a swirl of black cloak around him, while one of the senior black brothers, Bowen Marsh, recited the vows. "Hear my words, and bear witness to my vow." Arthur repeated them, voice low but resolute. "Night gathers, and now my watch begins." Ned stood aside, listening. His chest felt tight. The vow was simple yet absolute. A life of service, of renunciation of titles and claims, of fatherhood and glories. For Arthur, it was more than a vow of personal atonement. It was a vow that protected Jon, ensuring that Arthur would never threaten Robert's rule or pose a claim that might draw attention. "I shall wear no crowns and win no glory. I shall live and die at my post. I am the sword in the darkness." Arthur's voice did not falter. Snow drifted, settling on his hood and shoulders. The old gods, silent as ever, witnessed the forging of a new bond. When the vow ended, Bowen Marsh stepped forward with a ceremonial cloak of black wool. Arthur rose, and Marsh draped it over his shoulders. "You are now a brother of the Night's Watch," said Marsh. "Your name is Aaron Storm no more, if you wish. Here we have no bastards or lords, only brothers." Arthur bowed his head. "I am a brother," he said softly. Jeor Mormont nodded solemnly. "The oath is made. The watch begins. Welcome." Ned inclined his head but said nothing. He had seen men take the black before, but never had it meant so much nor cost so dearly. Arthur Dayne, Sword of the Mourning, was gone, replaced by a nameless crow who would guard the realm from threats beyond the wall. Perhaps, in a way, it was a final act of guardianship for Rhaegar's son, protecting Jon by disappearing utterly. They rode back to Castle Black in a grim silence. Once inside the gates, the new brother was ushered off by Marsh to receive tasks: chopping ice, storing firewood, scrubbing armaments. Ned and Jory observed from a distance as Arthur stooped beside the other recruits. His posture was calm, but a flicker of defiance in his eyes betrayed a proud knight unaccustomed to menial labor. Even so, he did not protest. Ned found an ache in his chest at the sight. This was the right choice, he told himself. Yet it felt cruel. He recalled how Arthur had once dazzled him with swordsmanship, the dancing blade called dawn shining like pale fire. The realm had lost that light, but perhaps the realm would know a different kind of salvation if Jon Snow was kept safe. That evening, Ned spoke privately with Jeor Mormont. They agreed that the new brother would be posted at Castle Black for the time being, not sent out on dangerous ranging missions until he was properly tested. Ned impressed upon the Lord Commander that this man's skill could be of value in training novices. Mormont understood and concurred. He did not pry further. At dawn the next day, Ned prepared to depart. He intended to head back toward Winterfell at once, for his absence would be noted if he lingered too long. He had said his goodbyes to Jeor Mormont and the senior brothers. Now he only needed to take leave of Arthur, if that farewell was even wise. Too public a show of familiarity might raise questions. In the courtyard, Ned found Arthur brushing down a horse in the stables. Several black brothers milled about, paying him little mind. Arthur still wore the same battered cloak from the vow-taking ceremony, though it had been pinned with a small black clasp. Ned approached, feigning a casual air, stopping a few steps away. "Brother," he said quietly, acknowledging the black cloak. Arthur turned. For a moment, Ned glimpsed the solemn dignity in his eyes. "Lord Stark, you ride for Winterfell?" "I do. My men are gathering. We'll leave within the hour." He hesitated, glancing at the stable hands. They were focused on other tasks, but Ned kept his voice low. "Will you be well here?" Arthur nodded. "I'll endure. The vow holds me now, and I've no illusions about comfort. But I can wield a sword for the watch. That, at least, feels true to the man I was." Ned's throat tightened. "If you ever need anything, if the Lannisters pry, or if there is danger, I will help if I can." Arthur offered a small, rueful smile. "I suspect your help will be from afar. I must stand on my own. But your kindness is not forgotten." He paused. "Tell Jon." He hesitated, eyes flicking downward. "No, never mind. It is better that he does not know me. But watch over him, Eddard Stark. Keep him safe." Ned pressed his lips together. "I will. I promise." They stood in silence for a few heartbeats. Then Ned extended his hand. Arthur clasped it firmly, the grip of knights who had once met in mortal combat and now parted as allies in secrecy. No more words were spoken. Arthur turned back to the horse, burying himself in the tasks of a humble stable hand. Ned left him there and joined Jory in the yard. Their horses were saddled, provisions packed. With a final nod to the watchman at the gate, they rode out of Castle Black, heading south. Snow whipped their cloaks behind them, and the wall's immense silhouette gradually receded into the distance. For a day and a half, Ned let the column of thoughts swirl in his mind without trying to shape them. Only when they were beyond earshot of the last watch patrol did he speak to Jory. "He's gone," Ned said quietly. "A brother of the watch with no name of note. Let us hope that buries suspicion." Jory guided his horse around a fallen log. "Aye, my lord, and if the Lannisters persist." Ned's jaw clenched. "They'll find only whispers. Aaron Storm is not an identity that leads to House Dayne. If they push further, they might guess he was some exiled knight, but the vow closes that door. The watch protects its own from outside claims." Jory nodded, still uneasy. We must return home quickly and prepare for the king's visit then. Yes, Ned said. King Robert will have questions enough, but not about a hidden knight, I hope. He urged his horse into a brisk canter, determined to put as many leagues behind him as possible. Ahead lay the labyrinth of duties at Winterfell, feasts to plan, realms to govern, children to guide, and, overshadowing all, the knowledge that one false step could unveil Jon's birthright. They made hard travel for days, pushing the horses. A few storms forced them to seek shelter, but Ned was impatient to be back. It was nearly 2 fortnights after leaving Castle Black that they arrived at the gates of Winterfell. The towers rose stout and familiar against a leaden sky, the banner of the direwolf snapping in the wind. Catelyn was there to greet them, anxious but composed. "You were gone longer than I expected," she said, her eyes flicking between Ned and Jory. "I trust all is well?" Ned dismounted and kissed her cheek, the chill of the journey still clinging to him. "All is well enough," he said. "I had matters to address at the wall." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "At the wall? I had no word you would travel so far." Ned offered a reassuring smile. "Some unexpected business with the Night's Watch, requests for supplies, new recruits. Nothing alarming, my lady. The realm's defense must never be neglected." She accepted his vague explanation but looked unconvinced. "Come inside. The children will be glad of your return, especially Jon. He's been quieter than usual." Ned suppressed a sigh. "Lead on." He followed her into the castle, the warmth of the great hearths washing over him. He tried to recall the last time life had been simple, free of the swirl of secrets. Perhaps never. Duty had always weighed heavily on him, even before the rebellion. Robb and Bran rushed to greet him in the great hall. Arya peered from behind a pillar with a grin on her face. Sansa stood primly, offering a lady's curtsy. Rickon clung to old Nan's skirts, uncertain. And Jon lingered at the edge of the group, an unspoken question in his eyes. Ned greeted each child, listening to their stories of the days he missed. Robb boasted of improvements in his sword drills. Sansa described a new embroidery she was making. Arya wanted to show him how well she could shoot. Bran pestered him with questions about the far north. Only Jon remained silent, watching with a mix of admiration and distance. Later, when the children drifted off to their tasks and the great hall quieted, Jon approached. Ned sensed the boy's presence before he spoke, noticing the hesitant shuffle of feet. "Father," Jon said softly. "Yes, Jon?" Ned turned, seeing the concern etched on the boy's face. "You went to the wall?" Ned nodded. "Aye. The Night's Watch needed my counsel." Jon bit his lip. Is it as grand as they say?" He paused, then added, "Did you see Uncle Benjen?" Ned's expression softened at the mention of Benjen, his younger brother and first ranger of the Watch. "I did not see Benjen. He's out on a ranging, I'm told. As for the wall, it is a sight like no other. Cold and forbidding, yet awe-inspiring. A man can feel very small standing upon it." Jon's eyes flickered with longing. "I would like to see it someday." A pang of sadness touched Ned. It was an innocent wish, but he knew how quickly the Night's Watch could become a cage. "Perhaps you will," he said gently. "But I pray you find your place in Winterfell first." Jon's brow furrowed. "Yes, father." He seemed about to say more, but withheld it. Instead, he shifted awkwardly. "It's good that you're home." "It's good to be home," Ned replied. Jon moved off and Ned found himself staring after the boy, recalling Arthur's last words. "Tell Jon?" "No, never mind." The boy had no notion of the man who had just sacrificed everything for him, had no understanding of how precarious his life truly was. Ned wondered if there would come a day when he would sit Jon down and share the truth, that the man called Aaron Storm was once Sir Arthur Dayne, who guarded him even in exile, and that Jon himself carried the blood of Targaryen kings. The thought made Ned's heart twist. In the days that followed, Ned resumed his duties as Lord of Winterfell. He consulted with Maester Luwin about the upcoming royal visit. They would need to plan feasts, secure lodging for dozens if not hundreds of retainers, ensure provisions for the hunts. Robert's appetite was legendary, and so was his retinue's capacity for revelry. Catelyn took charge of many of these details, though she frequently turned to Ned for guidance. As the weeks rolled by, little changed outwardly, but Ned felt the shift inside him. Each morning, he rose with the awareness that Arthur Dayne was now at the wall, living a life of anonymity. At times, Ned pictured him standing watch on a frigid battlement or sparring in the yard with new recruits, teaching them the grace of a sword thrust that had once been famed across the realm. Did the ghost of Dawn haunt him? Did he ever speak in his sleep, naming Rhaegar or Lyanna? From time to time, a raven would arrive from Castle Black, bearing routine updates about wildlings and the weather. Ned would search them for any hint about the new brother in black. None gave mention, which was likely a good sign. No news, no trouble. Winterfell continued its daily rhythms. Sansa practiced her courtesies and needlework. Arya evaded her septa whenever she could, slipping off to learn archery or to spar with a wooden sword when Ser Roderick allowed. Bran climbed walls and explored the towers, always fearless. Rickon wandered behind them all, a curious toddler in a world of older siblings. Robb honed his leadership, preparing for the day he would be the Stark in Winterfell. Theon Greyjoy swaggered among them, a ward and borderline friend. And Jon was at once part of the family and apart from it. He grew leaner, taller, his face shaping into sharper lines. The training yard became his sanctuary, the place where he could excel. Ser Roderick praised his focus, though it was tinged with the sorrowful recognition that a bastard's skill sometimes won him more envy than admiration. Jon took it stoically. He rarely smiled, and when he did, it was tinged with a quiet longing. Amid all of this, Ned did his best to show Jon what fatherly affection he could. He knew it was not enough. The boy felt overshadowed by his half-siblings and unloved by Catelyn. At times, Ned saw the old resentment in Catelyn's eyes, though she tried to hide it for Ned's sake. He understood her feelings but felt powerless to change them, bound by a secret that she could never be allowed to learn. As the months inched forward, the day of Robert's arrival drew nearer. Ravens came bearing details: the king's progress, the retinue's size, the expected route. Ned dreaded it. Whenever he recalled Jaime Lannister's suspicious questions, a ripple of apprehension quickened his pulse. But the hush of winter in the north was deep. Perhaps, if the Lannisters had learned anything more about a living Kingsguard, they had found no proof. No further word reached him. Then, less than a moon's turn before Robert was set to arrive, a raven came from Castle Black addressed to Lord Stark, carrying a brief but urgent note from Jeor Mormont. Lord Stark, we have lost 2 rangers in the haunted forest. Their bodies were not found, a matter of concern. Some claim it is the work of raiders. Others whisper darker things. Also, a new brother was gravely injured in a training accident. Aaron, the knight who joined us. He recovers, but slowly. We have no maester and rely on our own skill. I thought you might wish to know. Yours in service, Jeor Mormont. Ned's heart jolted at the mention of Arthur's name. Injured? How severely? The letter gave few details. He pictured the proud knight lying on a crude pallet, perhaps feverish. How had it happened? A training accident or something more sinister? Yet Ned could not simply rush to Castle Black with the king's visit imminent. Not without rousing suspicion. He paced his solar, letter in hand, mind churning with concern. If Arthur survived the Tower of Joy only to die in some accident on the wall, what cruel twist of fate that would be. Yet the note indicated he was not dead, only recovering slowly. He shared the news with Maester Luwin privately, asking if they might send any medicinal supplies north. The Maester agreed at once, though he raised an eyebrow at Ned's apparent personal concern. Ned masked it by saying, "Any wounded brother of the Watch is of interest to the Warden of the North." Luwin accepted that explanation with a small bow. Ned put the matter out of his mind as best he could, focusing on the final preparations for Robert's arrival. The day came cold and clear, with a crisp sun shining upon the thick snow blanketing the grounds. Word reached them that the royal procession was just a few leagues away, So Ned and his household arrayed themselves to greet the king outside Winterfell's gates. The banners of House Stark lined the battlements, and a path was cleared through the snow. Before long, a horn call sounded. The king's vanguard approached, knights in shining armor, the royal banner of Baratheon, a crowned stag on a field of gold streaming. Behind them came the lords and ladies who had accompanied Robert from King's Landing. The Lannisters, the Tyrells, the Redwyne twins, assorted courtiers, gold cloaks, and servants. And there, at the head, rode King Robert Baratheon himself on a massive warhorse, his huge belly straining the surcoat emblazoned with the stag. His black beard spilled over his chest, streaked with the first threads of gray. Ned stepped forward, flanked by Catelyn, Robb, and the rest. He bowed deeply as Robert halted. "Your Grace, Winterfell welcomes you." Robert dismounted with a grunt, ignoring the offered help from one of his guards. He strode forward, arms outstretched in good humor. "Ned, my old friend." He pulled Ned into a crushing hug, the smell of leather and sweat filling Ned's nostrils. "Gods, you've gotten skinnier. What's this North done to you?" Ned forced a smile, returning the embrace. "It keeps me lean and strong, Your Grace. A diet of cold and duty." Robert barked a laugh. "Duty? You speak like a man who's forgotten how to drink and feast. We'll remedy that. By the Seven." Behind Robert came Queen Cersei, draped in rich furs, her golden hair swept up. Her green eyes flicked coolly over Ned, then assessed Catelyn with faint condescension. Prince Joffrey followed, sullen and proud. Myrcella and Tommen were bundled in cloaks, led by Septa Mordaine's southern counterpart. Farther back, Ned saw Jaime Lannister on a white stallion, face unreadable. The Kingslayer's gaze swept the yard, assessing. Ned's pulse ticked faster at the memory of their last conversation. Pleasantries were exchanged. Robert greeted the Stark children with booming joviality, giving Robb a hearty clap on the shoulder, calling Sansa a beauty, teasing Arya about her boyish stance, patting Bran's head and ruffling Rickon's hair. Jon stood to the side, uncertain, until Robert's gaze fell on him. "And who's this?" Robert asked, tone shifting slightly. Ned stepped in smoothly. "My son, Jon Snow." Robert's attention lingered on the boy, taking in the dark hair, the serious eyes. After a brief pause, the king nodded, forcing a genial smile. "Ah, the bastard. Good lad, I'm sure. Strong arms, I hope." "Yes, Your Grace," Jon said, bowing stiffly. Robert patted the boy's shoulder in passing. It was a moment that might have been fatherly if not for the subtle tension. Ned watched carefully, half expecting a flicker of recognition that Jon's features resembled the Starks far too closely, or that perhaps some Targaryen trait might shine through. But Robert was not known for his keen perceptions. He moved on, calling for drink and meat before the feast even began. Ned breathed a silent sigh of relief. One meeting down, 1,000 more to go. The court flooded into Winterfell, filling the halls with color and noise. Servants rushed to accommodate them, stabling horses, hauling baggage, preparing the evening's feast. Music drifted through the corridors, and the sense of roasting boar and spiced wine filled the air. That night, the great hall was ablaze with torchlight. Tables groaned under the weight of food, fresh bread, roasted venison, onions and carrots, pies filled with pigeon or rabbit, sweet cakes drizzled with honey. Wine and ale flowed freely. The king sat at the high table beside Ned and Catelyn, with Robert's family and the highborn lords arrayed along the dais. The Stark children were further down, except for Robb, who was allowed near the front as heir to Winterfell. Robert bellowed with laughter at old war stories, praising Ned for his valor at the Trident, though he conveniently glossed over the horrors that had followed. Jaime Lannister sat a short distance away, silent but watchful. Cersei made polite conversation with Catelyn, though tension underscored every word. Tyrion Lannister was there as well, the dwarf with mismatched eyes, sipping wine and observing the hall with wry amusement. Ned noted that Tyrion's gaze sometimes settled on Jon, though whether with curiosity or something else, Ned could not say. As the feast wore on, Robert's face reddened from drink. He slammed a hand on the table at one point, calling for hush. "Ned, a toast to the old days. To the memory of Rhaegar Targaryen's skull, crushed beneath my hammer." He guffawed, ignoring the uneasy shift of some at the table who recalled the brutality of that time. Ned forced a weak smile, raising his cup. The name hammered in his ears: Rhaegar Targaryen, father of Jon Snow. If only Robert knew. When the feast finally ended, Robert declared he wanted to see the crypts of Winterfell to pay respects to Lyanna. Ned had expected this. It had become a ritual every time Robert visited. So Ned led him through the silent corridors, down the twisting steps into the cold darkness where the Stark kings were entombed. A few guards trailed behind at a discreet distance. Torches lit the way, flickering on the stone faces of long-dead Starks. At Lyanna's tomb, Robert stood for a long time, head bowed. Ned held the torch, casting dancing shadows on the carved figure that resembled his sister. Her features were forever youthful, a stone flower snatched too soon by frost. Robert's expression turned mournful, and Ned sensed the swirl of emotions beneath that broad chest. Guilt, regret, love lost. "She should be buried on a sunny hill of flowers," Robert muttered, voice thick. "Not in this damned cold darkness." Ned inhaled softly. She was of the north. She wanted to be laid to rest with her family. Robert let out a ragged sigh. "Aye, so you always say. Gods, Ned. I loved her more than life itself." Ned said nothing. He respected Robert's grief, though the memory of Lyanna's final words told him that her feelings had never belonged to Robert in that way. They had loved each other as friends, perhaps, but Rhaegar had claimed her heart, and with it, fathered a child who now bore the name Snow, living in Robert's castle under Robert's nose. Robert turned, his eyes glistening. He wiped his face, then scowled as if ashamed of tears. "Come, let's go. I'll not linger here all night, or I'll freeze in my cups." He cast one last glance at the statue, then strode off. Ned followed, leaving that tomb behind in heavy silence. They emerged into the courtyard, the cold air startling them after the stagnant chill of the crypts. Robert clasped Ned's shoulder. "If you ever grow tired of the North, old friend, remember, you have a place at my court. The realm could use more honest men." Ned forced a tight smile. "You honor me, your grace, but I am needed here." Robert shrugged, as if he had expected no less. "Well, I won't press you, but it's good to see you, Ned. Truly." Then he beckoned for his guards and stumbled off toward his chambers, leaving Ned alone under the moonlight. Ned lingered, arms folded, breath misting. A swirl of conflicting emotions battered him. Robert spoke of honesty, of their old friendship, yet if he knew Ned's greatest secret, the realm would be drenched in blood. There was no easy path here, only the solemn duty to protect Jon. At that moment, footsteps sounded behind him. He turned sharply, bracing for intrusion, but it was Jaime Lannister. The Kingslayer wore a half-smile, hands resting lightly on his sword belt. "Lord Stark," Jaime greeted softly. "I hoped to find you alone." Ned's jaw tensed. "What do you want, Lannister?" Jaime strolled closer, boots crunching in the thin layer of snow. "Such hostility. Can't two old soldiers share a civil word?" "We have little to share," Ned said, voice clipped. Jaime tilted his head. "Oh, I'm not so sure. I recall you making a journey south not long ago, rummaging around old battlefields. And I recall hearing some interesting whispers about a swordsman in the north. But now all is quiet. It makes me wonder what happened to him." Ned's heart hammered, but he kept his face unreadable. "If you're still chasing ghost tales, I can't help you." Jaime smirked. "Ghost tales indeed. Very well. You know, the king still rages at the thought of any Targaryen whelp alive in the world. Prince Viserys across the sea. The rumor of a daughter too. And sometimes I hear older rumors. Varys is full of them, yet none lead anywhere concrete." He paused, letting his words hang. If one more Targaryen existed, hidden under the nose of a loyal friend, that friend would be a traitor indeed. Ned held Jaime's gaze. I've heard the king's anger at traitors. I share it. Are we finished? Jaime studied him a moment longer. Then he gave a lazy shrug. For now. Enjoy your evening, Lord Stark. He turned and departed, leaving Ned seething with a silent dread. Clearly, Jaime still suspected something. That he persisted in prying indicated a dangerously sharp mind beneath his golden mane. Ned let out a breath, cursing the day the Lannister had chosen to wear the white cloak. He turned toward the keep. Tomorrow would bring fresh hunts, more feasting, and endless courtesies. He would have to remain vigilant, ensuring no slip of the tongue revealed Jon's secret, ensuring no stray whisper from the wall came to the wrong ears, ensuring that Robert remained content to celebrate and then depart. And all the while, far to the north, Arthur Dayne lay recovering from a wound, a ghost in black who would never see dawn's light the same way again. In the nights that followed, Ned found himself praying more often in the Godswood, kneeling before the heart tree in the swirling snow. He prayed for Jon's safety, for Arthur's recovery, for the strength to shield the realm from the chaos that truth would unleash. And in the hush of that ancient grove, the wind among the branches seemed to whisper back, as though the old gods bore witness to this heavy burden and promised nothing but silence. Time would march on, and the lines of fate would tighten. But for now, Ned Stark guarded his fragile secret in the darkness, trusting that a hidden knight upon the wall stood vigil in ways the realm would never know. If winter was coming, then so too was the day when truth might come to light. But not yet, not while honor and duty still held back the storm.